I'm so glad you could come back. My name is Kimmy Cummings, and I'm going to be dragging you through this bar prep. We're going to start off first with property. And for these videos, I am going to be the evil mistress of property for you. So first, we're going to talk about ownership of real property. Because in order for that property to be used, you have to own it. So who are the important people when it comes to ownership of property? Well, we have a grantor, who is the owner, current owner, or the seller, donor. Now, and then we have the grantee, who's the buyer or the recipient of that property. The way we're going to do this is I'm going to help you with some mnemonics. And if you don't know what a mnemonic is, well, you might have bigger problems. Now let us talk about future interests. Because the future is now. No, it's not now. We're talking about future interests. And wow, things are very interesting right now. We're talking about property. And it's important to remember that. So future interests, you got to make sure you know about reversions. What will cause this interest that you want to invest in you in the future? What can cause it to revert back to Uncle Billy Bob, who may not change his mind and let you have it anymore? You gotta know what, and that's where, the bopping and suds come in, because that can cause a reversion. Now, the possibility of a reverter is when the possibility of that reversion happening. Now, you're also going to need to know if there's a right of re-entry. And what that means is if you don't own all of the property, and rather all the interest in the property, say you have a life estate, meaning it's only for as good as you're alive, or some other form of tenancy, which we will get to. Hold your horses. Well, that means the grantor of your temporary interest can come in and just take it back. And that is their right of re-entry. Seems a little unfair, doesn't it? Doesn't that just seem a little unfair? Now, in a little bit, we'll talk about remainders. Essentially, what causes a vested remainder, a contingent remainder, the rule in Shelley's case, doctrine of worthier title, and a survivorship contingency. We'll also discuss the executory interests, including what a shifting executory interest is and a springing executory interest. And then we will have to discuss the transferability of remainders and executory interests, as well as a classification of those interests. They do kind of get important every now and then. Now, let's go on and skip back to the remainders. Now, a vested remainder is as easy as ABC. Yes, it's another mnemonic. ABC. Now, let's say I want to vest my remainder in my friend Wilma. Now, to make sure it vests, Velma must definitely be ascertainable within the rap period. And no, I'm not talking about music. I'm talking about the rule against perpetuities. Meaning, I can't say, oh, well, it's gonna go to Wilma's second daughter. But she doesn't have any daughters yet. She ain't even married. She doesn't even have the parts to make a baby yet. She hasn't had that surgery. Anyway, because you can't definitely ascertain that person exists, well, that makes it fail. But if it's just Wilma, Wilma is definitely ascertainable. Now, X must be a life in being at the time of conveyance. So Wilma must actually exist. She can't be dead. She can't have just disappeared. So she either has to be in being at the time of the conveyance or within the wrap period. Now, C, Wilma's future interest must be certain to happen. Meaning, she most certainly must be getting this property. Because God knows I do not want to give it to Betty. Because we all know Betty's husband is not reliable. Well, Wilma's husband, he's so good in those little stone cars, isn't he? Just running. Man, think of those calves. Anyway, so a contingent remainder is a remainder that is contingent upon a person either doing something or not. Just like a fee simple contingent. Makes it kind of easy. Now, we'll get to Shelley's rule, the rule in Shelley's case, and the doctrine of worthy or title when we get to RAP a little bit later. Now, survivorship contingency is if this person survives, it's contingent upon their surviving for them to get it. Kind of straightforward. Now, let's talk about them in executory interests. Now, a shift in executory interest is, let's say I want to give it to Wilma. But if Wilma ever sells her pearls, well, I don't want her to have it. If she can't keep holding them pearls, what makes you think she's going to take care of my land? Or say, well, I'll give her my estate, but only if it's kept as a farm. If it's not kept in a farm, then Wilma will get it lost to Betty. So it'll shift to Betty if Wilma stops making it a farm. See how it shifts? And the reason being is it allows the grantor to give a third party who is not the grantor a possibility of an interest if the property isn't maintained in the way it should be according to them. So say I'll give my land to Wilma if she maintains it as a farm for 10 years. Well, 9 years and 8 months in, she decides she doesn't want to farm anymore, that she's going to make it an orchard. Well, Betty can swoop right on up in there and take the property. And it'll shift right to her. Legally shift to her. We'll get to adversely later. Now, let's talk about transferability of remainders and executory interests. They can be transferred just like a life estate can. You can transfer the rest of your remaining life estate to anyone you want, but it only goes for your life. Not very useful if you're on a deathbed.